Our next panel, From Community Data to Citizen Activism, How Innovative Technologies Are Revolutionising Public Services, is about to begin. The service provider industry is undergoing a massive transformation driven by technologies. Chaired by Sally Meecham, independent transformation consultant, this high-energy session will demystify the tech disrupting services. Sally is an experienced digital leader with a track record of delivering high-profile, innovative, culture-changing transformation projects in large, complex organizations in the public and private sector. Sally has held various senior interim roles: CEO at the Centre of Digital Public Services in Wales, Director of Digital Data and Technology at Companies House, COO at the Cabinet Office and Government Digital Service, Chief Digital Technology Officer at Crown Commercial Service, and Chief Digital Officer at DEFRA. So, needless to say, we're honoured to have Sally with us. So please, will you make her feel welcome?
Thank you, Josie. How do we make this work? Is this working? It's working now. Thank you very much. Hello, everybody. Thanks for joining our panel session. I will get the panellists to introduce themselves, but I just want to say, please can we make this an interactive session? Please feel free to put your hands up. There's some people who I recognise here who are not shy about saying things, some ex-colleagues. So I'm going to start with a question. I have some in my back pocket, but I really hope that we have the main thrust of it is questions and comments from yourself. So I'll ask the panel to introduce themselves, and then when they answer the first question. So what I'd like to start with is, what is the role and responsibility, the relationship between citizens, participants, government, suppliers, partners, however you want to describe them, in the design and delivery of better public services? And as this is a tech week and we're talking about innovation, what is the role and whose responsibility is innovation within the public sector? And also I'd like to make sure we cover, if we think it's necessary, that innovation is not just in tech, but across the whole of the organisation. So if we can start with what you think the relationship is, or what it should be and what it could be. And I'm thinking we've all got our own microphones. So if you introduce yourselves, just press that. And then if you can answer the question. Thank you.
Thanks, Sally. Is that on?
Don't think it's on. I think it's a double pusher.
Hi, everyone. Thanks, Sally. My name is Paul Shepherd. I'm the founder and CEO of a company called LogicDialog. We are a conversational AI platform, and we serve majority local governments. And I think it's, in terms of the responsibility, I think it's a joint responsibility. I think citizens have a responsibility to flag up when they are unhappy with services, and they need a voice to be able to express what could be delivered better about services. And I think the public sector has a responsibility to listen, firstly, and to run multiple proofs of concepts to try and get the services to a place whereby the feedback is being listened to and acted upon and iterated upon. And I think that joint responsibility will see us move towards continual improvement of public services.
Brilliant, thank you. Myra.
Hi, hello everyone. Thank you for being here. It sounds like there's a sort of amazing party happening outside. I don't know if you've got the same acoustics as us, so thank you for being here and listening. My name's Myra Hunt. I'm the joint CEO of a sponsored body, so supported by the Welsh Government, called the Centre for Digital Public Services, and we build capacity and capability in the public sector in Wales to improve our digital services. The founding principle of CDPS, the Centre for Digital Public Services, is user-centred design. So it's all about designing public services around the needs of the user. What I see happening is two diverse things, which I'm sure many people in the audience are very familiar with, which are incredible rising expectations as we all experience this amazing wider transformation of all of the aspects of our lives in terms of the digital world. And at the same time, as more and more services are delivered online, in the case of government, an increasing challenge of exclusion, because those people left behind are being more and more left behind as by definition more moves online. So we in the public sector, I feel, are having to deal with these two conflicting currents of incredibly fast rising expectations, which is a joy to many of us because we're all experiencing this wonderful revolution. And at the same time, many of us being more and more left behind. And that's really challenging in terms of how we innovate and design our solutions. So I agree with what Paul was saying about how we all have to work in much more iterative, agile ways to understand the challenge of those changes. Thank you. Oh, you've got one.
Hi, I'm Mark Woods. I'm the CTO for Splunk. Splunk is a data analytics firm doing the important things in the background for most companies that they need to run, including in public services. So I really think in the innovation space, to probably be a little bit more controversial, service providers have a responsibility within that space to deliver stuff that's already been innovated, not to necessarily get involved in new technology and new services. That's actually the role of vendors and suppliers who have the space, the capacity, and sometimes the money to do that. But that means almost taking that extreme ownership. It means understanding where that sits between the citizens you serve and actually the capacity you have to make that change. And that's incredibly difficult because everyone wants to focus on that space where really things aren't moving forward and try and reinvent things. I think specifically from that technology space, it's about taking the things that work, that have been invented, and applying them better.
Thank you. And Paul.
Hi, everyone. My name is Paul Matthews. I'm the Chief Executive of Monmouthshire County Council, and I have been for over a decade now. My organisation, drop the word council, we get through about £400 million a year. We provide hundreds of different services. Citizens sometimes, customers sometimes, different sets of relationships around trying to do good things, sometimes enforcing, sometimes setting policies that people don't like. So we're in a contested space. Citizens fund us either directly or indirectly through their taxes, so their view matters. We're a political organisation, we carry a political mandate, so being close to citizens, being responsive to citizens is really, really important. And practice that we have dates so quickly. Actually having a deeply integrated approach to digital is no easy task when you have 1,200 plus statutory duties and probably around 800 different services that operate within one model. So plenty to play with over the course of the next 30 to 35 minutes.
Thank you. Okay, we'll use this for now. I think we'll just be sharing this one around with us, to be honest. I'm happy to go into another question, unless any. Oh, someone got a hand. Brilliant. Let's do it. And we've got there's a microphone coming.
Hi, thank you, and nice to meet you all. I just wanted to ask a question. How do you incentivize innovative technology in these public sector services, given the economic and political climate? how are you going to metric innovation and fund it and support it and enable it?
I think that's really interesting, because also that was going to be my follow-up question. No, not that. But you talked about the with regards to funding. So how do you incentivize? And one of the things as well is, how do we justify the spend on innovation when we're always being told there isn't enough money for the public sector? And so that's sort of wrapping those two questions in together. Thank you very much. Who wants to take this? Who wants to take this?
I'm happy to start. Thank you. That's a really great question. And so as a small, compared to Paul, purchaser in the public sector, where I'm looking for innovation is to unblock blockers. And I have so many blockers. So I'm so interested in any innovation that would address those. And the difficulty that we face on the other side is how to procure that and source it and know that it's available to us. So for me, it's all about relationships, actually, bizarrely, because it's hard when you're up against the wire, where your funding's maybe under pressure, where you've got a lot of problems to solve, to make enough time for getting out there to learn about those innovations. So I think the public sector needs to get better at sharing our problems so that the innovators can help us solve those problems. And I haven't quite worked out how to do that yet, but that's the challenge. And just on the funding question, I think the funding question changes the structure of our organisation. So it might mean that you don't have a separate innovation department because you can't afford to run a separate innovation department. It doesn't diminish the need for investment in innovation, whether that money is spent inside or outside, but it might change the structure of organisations and where they find innovation. Thank you.
Looks like it's me next. I think it's a cracking question, and I don't sit here with all the answers. What I will say is I've always believed that money follows clarity. So funding has never been my God. Actually, it's the idea, it's the desire, it's the willingness and the ability to have people that are as interested in tomorrow as they are today. In my world, in certainly some parts of the public sector in the UK, so I'm not being specifically Welsh here, you can walk into an organisation, you can give it a sniff for a couple of minutes, and you just know it's dead. There's not too much going on. There's not too much freedom. There's not too much onus on trying to think through where sector leading is, and there isn't too much desire to see what's going on elsewhere. So I think your question is conditioned on, do the people towards the top of an organisation actually want to change? Do they believe there is value in it? And where they do, is it change for improvement? Metrics, quite a difficult question for me to sort of generalise on, given the variety of the organisation that I work within. But there's no such thing as free money. We have business case programs, just as you will in your organisations. And when we set parameters for delivery, we're pretty keen on them. One of the hardest things for us to do, candidly, is we're never running out of challenges to sort. There's always something new, and there's always something fresh, and we tend to have many different agencies presuming that it's our job to sort out their issue. One of the issues, one of the things that the really best councils do is they set their own agenda. They realise that they have a legitimacy and they're not in a principal-agent relationship, and they'll fight for that freedom to do what matters to them, and they'll hold the course. That sounds rather straightforward, but in my sort of world, if you value innovation, you have to value freedom. You have to, as I say, you have to bring people to your organisation that you think are outstanding. There's no place for average. And we have to be quite selective in terms of the things that we do. Because if we try to do everything at any point in time, we would fail on everything. So for me, it's clarity rather than money. Yes, there are some strident financial times at the moment, but there's enough money out there to do anything if you've got the conviction and the clarity to achieve it. And the best councils still are developing. They still are progressive. And they still are doing interesting things, but not all.
So I don't have to deal with some of those budgets at the moment, but I have had in the past. And I think I'd start with almost what's rolled out often when we talk about innovation. How many of you have heard of, we're going to change everything about the aircraft as it's flying in the air? We talked about vision and clarity. Often that's put out there. The only thing that happens when you change anything in an aircraft when it's in the air is it crashes. The reality is, as we move things forward, especially when it's service delivery, we need to use imperatives more. There are things that you absolutely have to do. You can't turn them off. They're required. Some of those will sit in areas of cyber, some will be in assurance, some will be in regulation. What's happened historically, those have been separated. This is what I must do to run my services. These are the nice things that I could do to improve it. And it's easy then to start squeezing and reducing down those areas that are nice to haves and focusing all your areas on the must have. That means that typically your internal experts, especially when we move to complex systems, which nearly every public service has become, start being focused all on the everyday must have, fulfill this requirement. Making that space for innovation is about utilizing more of those imperatives, not just saying this is just for box ticking, but making as much of that as easy as possible, but also flexible enough to allow those people to start understanding where they can make those improvements. And as Paul said, from that top-down perspective, being really quite brutal about the areas in which you're going to get behind to really accelerate forward. Allow that open innovation some freedom, but you need to be really clear about those few things you're actually going to drive forward.
Looking at it from my company's perspective, which is all around automation, I think is a huge catch-22. So I think, on the one hand, the bucket is kind of running out of water. The water is cash. But when there's a hole in the bucket, you don't need more water. You need to plug the hole. And I think automation can do that. And this is a simplified equation, but when we speak to customers, we look at call volumes, email volumes, how long does it take to handle those calls, how long does it take to handle those emails, what are the topics of those calls and emails, and typically a call will cost a minute to serve, and you can get hundreds of thousands of those a year, and they could be about topics which are very transactional and very easily automated. So you need to invest in the automation to get the savings out of the back end, but you need to find the money to invest first. And this is where it comes back to that iterative approach. And then, of course, you need to prove that the sums work on paper, but do they work in real life? But yeah, we always use that analogy of probably don't need more water. You just need to kind of plug the hole. As Paul said, that I think there is money out there, but it's got to be leveraged properly and effectively.
Thank you, everyone. We had a kind of pre-panel discussion as well, talking about money. And as Paul said, I think we're all saying there is money there. It's how you use it. And does anybody have a follow-up question? Because if not, I think what I want to kind of go into and put your hands up and I'm happily take your question. But what I'd like to understand is there, going back to the relationship between citizen suppliers, partners and government, is government open enough? So as somebody who's worked in lots of different organisations, which Josie was reeling off, sorry about that, I'm going to shorten that list next time. You really have completely different attitudes from the commercial and procurement functions, whether you can speak to suppliers or not speak to suppliers. In my experience, my approach would be that you work very closely with your suppliers and you let the suppliers know and have a real true pipeline of what's going on, but that's not always the case. So I'm interested in, do you feel that we do work close enough with you, the suppliers, and what do you think could be improved? And also in your own organisations, Myra and Paul, your approach to working with the supplier community. So I pass that to you?
Yeah, okay. I think the initiatives are there and the channels are open, G-Cloud, Spark, procurement frameworks and the like. I don't think they are overly simple to get on and to use. But then I also feel that can act as a natural filter, because there is effort involved in being accepted onto these frameworks, reporting to these frameworks, winning business through these frameworks. And I think it's an easy line for startups to trot out, to say it's really hard to work with public sector organizations. But I think once you start working with public sector organizations, you realize that there has to be a challenge to be able to supply public sector organizations, because when you're supplying them, it's challenging. It's a complex, a local authority, for example, is a complex organization. So I kind of feel, yes, it could be streamlined and made a little bit easier. But I also think that challenge is kind of a natural filter to what companies are allowed to actually serve these complex organizations, because what you don't want is to be spending the public purse with a company that maybe doesn't have the right infrastructure in place and is going to kind of waste those precious pennies.
We two share that, and you three share that. Well, it was Pastor Paul. Whoever wants it first. I'd like you all to answer.
I think I've sat in the wrong place on this stage. There's a lady in the third row that could answer this better than me, for me, because she's been doing it with me for the last sort of 6 or 7 years. So I'll have a crack, and then she'll probably throw a brick to say I've got it all wrong. So to the question, there are, in an organization of the scale of mine, there are some things that are just enterprise-wide. So not everything is up for conversation, is it? You need coherence. You need to be able to guide an organization successfully through 365 days, 24/7, and know that it's going to stand up when things really come under pressure. So you need a degree of solidity. Actually, I didn't realize until we met a few moments before we came on the stage. Paul's an example of one of those companies that have managed to worm their way into our organization over the years. We did buy product off what was then a very small company. And we did it by way of basically saying, give us a good price. We'll be a development partner for you. And when it works, we'll give testimonials, and we'll join with you. So there have been some examples where an organization of scale such as ours has been prepared to do that, been willing to do it. But I think I'll come back to something I said earlier. It doesn't really matter whether your organization's 5 strong or 5 million strong. If you haven't got people towards the top end that want to move, want to change, and are genuinely interested and curious about what today digital technology can do to improve your offer, I'd move on down the road. As a vendor, as a supplier, I wouldn't bother. I wouldn't waste your time. You could be banging your head against that door for, more hours than your cash flow will allow you to input to it. So you have to hunt down those pioneers, those places that are just interesting. And ultimately, we are an organization made up with people. We're the sort of organizations in my sector that you want to work with, you should be finding those people here today. They should be at this sort of event. I'm not going to do a roll call in terms of how many chief executives from Welsh councils are here today, but if they're not, the question should be asked, why not? And that should be a good guide to you in terms of how you choose to invest your time. So the opportunity to work with developing companies, new starts, we do some of that, but it's not an open door at any point of any day during every week. We have some things that we have to get done. If you hit us at the right moment in something that's really on our mind, your chances go through the roof. And the things that are on our mind at the moment would be things such as inequality. How do we address that in a way that we've never managed to do in the last 15 years? What are we doing on climate adaptation? What are we going to do to make a really big difference there? We're not yet through catch-up for all the learning loss that the pupils suffered through the pandemic. We have a whole bunch of mental health issues that we're trying to get our teeth into as an organization. If you've got product in those sorts of places, then it's more likely that you're going to be interesting and interested by an organization such as ours. So there's something about just trying to do your homework as vendors in terms of what a council's interested in, because we are not plain old vanilla. And sometimes the attack brand of suppliers, developers, is that we are. We are just not. The good news, if you get into us, we tend to stay. We're very patient with our investments. We're prepared to build and we're prepared to develop. But I often experience that we have suppliers approaching us that they've just not done their homework in terms of where we're at and what we're interested in, and that's not good.
I think that is a really good point, because what you said there, apart from you worming your way in, how's the relationship with suppliers? That was quite funny. But what's on your mind? And I think that government organisations publish their strategies, they talk about their work, and I don't think the supplier community always really, as you say, do their homework. So what is it that people want? Now, I might be wrong there, but I have spoken to people and don't necessarily really kind of get what we're doing. But I will ask Paul, do you think it's clear enough on your pipeline for the suppliers to know what your key areas of concern or activity are? I won't let you speak after this, don't worry.
She's a bugger, she is, honestly. I think the honest answer to that is perhaps not as clear as it was pre-pandemic. There was a time, and this event maybe we're walking back towards it. We were running events similar to this sort of 3 or 4 years ago, where the interaction between public and private, public and technology, I think was starting to develop well. We had a very interesting ecosystem, which was making it easier, certainly for new start technology companies, to work out what was on the mind of people like me without needing to invest, weeks and weeks and weeks in it. I think personally, some of that ecosystem has perhaps been lost during the pandemic, but we're here today. We have an opportunity, and at its best, at its really best, Wales is a village. It's the truth of the matter. We are a nation of phone calls at our best. At our worst, Wales is a village. We're myopic. We don't look outside. So, balancing that up, finding the interesting, curious people, being at events such as this, and I do think my sector has to work harder at saying, do you know what? If you're interested in X, so are we.
Yeah.
If you're developing Y, that's interesting to us because it talks to A. We don't do that, I think, in a meaningful way that's easily accessible. We could do better.
I really agree. I think kind of sharing your pipeline of work and your thoughts early on is really critical, and we don't do it. There is still I think a fear government about working with suppliers. It's still there that they're going to, we're not intelligent customers, but actually there is a really good partnership to be had with our supplier community. Mark?
Yeah, and I think you can simplify it as well, because when we talk about innovation, it has a spectrum. And if you think about things that are driving performance versus things that are driving understanding versus things that are actually just challenging the status quo or how you do things, that's really the rough spectrum. And sometimes we just don't separate it. If you're a startup coming in and you're like, oh, that's a really interesting idea, but all you're really trying to do is drive a 2% change in performance at scale immediately, well, you're putting them down the path of not necessarily being able to deliver that. The same thing for like more established suppliers. You should be saying, actually, how can you affect my performance now, increase some understanding, and then enable those challenge areas where actually you might want to experiment more broadly. It helps for that top-down vision in those teams that Paul was talking about, of saying, actually, there are only a few areas where I'm going to accept that challenge. And it's the other side of innovation where you do need a big stick. Otherwise, you end up with 10, 20, and then 30 more initiatives, none of which get backed up. Because I think the reality is we need to look at the capacity of our people, of our experts, to actually be able to get involved. There's nothing more frustrating than having a really great idea, of knowing it could make a difference, but it's one of 20 things that are trying to be achieved, and therefore there's no way you can actually go and achieve that.
Yeah. Thank you. Myra?
I'm probably just going to say something that's really familiar to everybody, but I suppose a nirvana for me is being much closer in the relationships between the citizen, the state, and the supplier. And how you do that and how you compress the timeline of all that insight and information that we're getting now have about citizens into actually producing the best products and services for them. And my experience sort of standing back and working with different government organizations is that we're still struggling with horizontal service delivery as opposed to vertical reward and vertical structures. So that integration between supplier, state and citizen is really hard because you're wanting to do that horizontally across your service so you can get the fulfillment right, but the institutional structures still mitigate against that. However, we're all working in an environment where probably, I'm guessing, very few of us in this room would want to embark on some kind of enormous state restructuring. So we've got to work out how we do that much more nimbly and much more flexibly, and how we reward people for working to deliver services, real meaningful services, not just with a badge on top that says this is a service, that actually goes quickly from citizen all the way through to fulfillment. And somehow we reward the vertical structures that we work against to reward that service delivery instead.
Okay.
Okay. Okay. Thank you. We have a hand. Can you please say where you're from? And thank you.
Hi, Alan Hill from Splunk. I thought it said where you from, so I was going to say from Wiltshire, so we're definitely outside of Wales. But I've got my question here. The title is Revolutionising Public Services. That's quite a high bar, revolutionising. But there are things like cyber defence, counter fraud, or even for those of us that recall queuing at the post office to get your car tax done, that's a revolutionised service. So the question is for the panel, what do you think is a great example of a revolutionised service, and why has it been so successful? What were the component parts of it?
That's an excellent question. I know that I have one, because it'll be the passport for me, but I will pass to you. What do government do that's fabulous?
That's a great question. What does government do that's fabulous? I think I do feel like they're trying harder to put kind of listening posts in place to gather data. I think there's definitely more of a push towards open data, open APIs, sharing of data. How that manifests itself, I'm not entirely sure, but I just know that there's a big push towards opening up kind of data and APIs so that at least those channels for data sharing and building products based on that data can start to materialize.
Sorry, can I just is there a service, I think this is probably your question as well, is there a service that you've previously used but have used recently that you think, wow, that has completely changed?
Not really.
No. Okay. It's loads of stuff, tell you. List as long as my arm.
I can be more positive. My bar's a lot lower. The most difficult thing for me, I think, in government, and I have some time in Whitehall, is to make things simple. That is what government finds really, really hard. It's really threatening, and it should be so rewarding. And so, can you make it simple? So I think of my mother-in-law, who's not with me now. She is astounded, that she can get her passport and that I can take a photo of her standing against her bedroom wall, and that is going to be her passport photo. Driving licenses. Make it simple. If government can make things simple, because ultimately, my colleagues all talk about foundational services. A lot of government is about filling in forms, getting permission, submitting data, receiving a financial reward or not, or some sort of payment, or making a payment. If we can do the foundational activities simply and easily for our users, to me, that's a revolution. So I love very basic. Passports, driving licenses, brilliant.
So I probably think about the national grid. So at the moment, how much effort has it been for everybody here to get, I think, more than 50% renewable into their supply? Zero. because actually in the background that work's been done. It's an incredibly complex system. We pull it from hither to post because it's pseudo-government in areas and pseudo-commercial in other areas. And yet in the background, with no real change for individuals, we've managed to blend in more than 50% renewable.
Brilliant, thank you. Quite topical today, actually, the National Grid. Lots of tweets flying around, but one for another conversation. Thanks.
The question was revolutionise. That's a high bar. We're building a 3 through 19 school at the moment in Abergavenny. When it's completed, it will be the first carbon neutral school anywhere in Wales of a 3 to 19 size. To achieve that has cost us a premium. Will anybody ever notice? Probably not. Is it the right thing to do? When I reflect on one of the 5 priorities that are really on my mind at the moment, climate adaptation behaviours, absolutely it is. So a premium, an investment that will pay back over 50 years. 5 years ago, I wouldn't have had a clue how to do that. What makes it more interesting for me is that that building is going to generate more energy than it will ever use. So all of a sudden, we can start thinking about private wiring into other buildings that we own on that campus. So we could be running a leisure centre in energy terms for nothing. We have a football stadium on that campus. We could be running that. So sometimes I think we hunt the wrong things. In my sort of space, there are some really interesting things going on at that level. To take it down to another level, if I just walk you back to the pandemic, certainly in Monmouthshire, the way that we used to run our civic amenity sites, that's tips to most people. You rocked up, you sat in a queue, you dumped your stuff, you went away. Just changing that to a book-only system and holding that perspective, many councils have given up on that. They've gone back to just rock up, come when you want. We've taken the view that we're not prepared to do that. We're prepared to have the community conversation which says there are benefits for you in us being able to predict when it's more likely that you're going to come, so that we can resource up for that, we can have the right waste streams ready to receive you, and we can schedule our loading so that we can be more efficient than perhaps we once were. So I'll give you 2 examples. They're my 2 examples. One is quite high touch. The latter, is it revolutionary? Not at all. Is it a significant change? And do I think over time it will adjust the way that citizens interact with our waste streams? I think it will. The former, I think, is a big deal. It's probably costing us £10 million more than we had to spend, and we wouldn't have known how to do it a few years ago. We haven't got a lot of money, but we've still chosen to make that investment, and that sets a new standard that I think others will be required to follow. So sometimes you have to model something, don't you? You have to be that place. It carries some risk, but I think that's a good example of where that's playing out on a really contemporary issue.
Brilliant. It's an excellent question, because also plays into, in your answer as well, Paul, when we talk about revolutionising, it's not just revolutionising tech, it could be people, places, governance process that are always part of innovation and change. Does anybody have a service or something that they feel has been revolutionised, or a question? Any questions in the audience? Lady with the lovely skirt again.
Hi. Again, sorry. I just wanted to talk more about how we bridge the gap between innovation and commercial. You were very clear, clarity is key, but when you have this big idea and a way to solve a problem, how do you prevent kind of middle layers and commercial being so feature function and looking at an enterprise if your organization doesn't buy in an enterprise way? So how do you bridge the gap between, this big idea and an enterprise service down to a commercial acquisition? It seems to be disjointed, I feel.
I think this drill down into it, because we're talking about the relationship between commercial, etc. But how do you get things done? How do you push it forward?
I think, again, going back to what Paul said, is understanding whether that big idea is going to resonate with the people that you're hoping will adopt that idea. But I also think there's a lot to be said for thinking big, but starting small. So I think trying to boil that big idea down to, in our world, a single use case, and a single use case that can be proven and then extrapolated to a much wider enterprise level, I think is a good place to start. I think in doing so, you're not only proving the concept, but you're likely gaining the trust of the people that ultimately will be signing off the check. So, yeah, I think choose a use case, make sure it resonates with the people that will be hopefully adopting the concept, and think big, but start small.
We're sharing this, we're not giving it away.
I won't say very much because I'm going to agree entirely with Paul. The only thing that I would say is if you're trying to get things done, particularly in the public sector, and get through to that kind of middle management, or the people who are always blamed for being blockers, to Paul's point, I think you need people who evangelize on your behalf. So I can go out and I can tell colleagues of Paul's that I've done something, or that we've got a proof of concept that's really good, till I'm blue in the face. And they'll have a drink with Paul, and Paul will say, have you seen what they've done down there? That's rather interesting. And so it's really important to have people who support you and become your evangelists and who sell on your behalf. But the approach that this Paul has outlined is exactly right. Thanks.
I think you're really clear about what's repeatable, like repeatability, but also flexibility. I think sometimes in public services, particularly when we go out and ask for a tender on something, what you're actually asking for is a repeatable solution. That's not necessarily going to drive broader innovation, but it is going to address a problem. If you've got a real clear problem and you need that, you can go and experiment, you can be very specific, and then you can make sure it's repeatable. I hate the word scalability. It turns lots of startups off because it generally tends to mean something that has all sorts of dependencies you can't control. But that doesn't give you flexibility. And the frustration becomes you look for a single use case which can have a massive benefit if it's repeatable and expect it to be eminently flexible. And it's not. And so when you have those conversations, being really clear about going, actually, this is something specific you need to address. We want to make sure it's repeatable. Or what level of flexibility are you expecting? That two-way conversation means that once you've proved that first bit, once you've started to get the traction, it all doesn't fall apart because the expectation is different.
Great, thank you. Paul?
I guess from the inside out then, politics matter, actually. The word commercial for many councils is not a good word. Many politicians would say that's not what we're here for. We're here for something else. I have to say, as a chief executive, I do not subscribe to that view. I think there's nothing wrong with margin. There's nothing wrong with making money. If that money is then handed back to politicians to allow them to exercise greater choice in terms of the services they provide. So I'm just trying to offer practical examples all of the time. We've co-owned a technology company, 10, 12 years with 3 other councils and a police force. So we co-own a technology company with 150 technologists. That gives us a capability, which is rare. Do we max that out? I don't think we do. But we have the capability to continue to move forward. So, on that sort of DDAT thing, that thing about digital data technology, people tell me that the T is meant to be the hardest thing because organizations won't come together on technology. 4 councils and 1 police force nailed that years ago, and we continue to nail it. We haven't nailed the other 2 parts. So there are examples inside out of organizations in Wales that are commercial in their outlook, but we need the headwinds of politics to be with us. For some, it's impossible. For others, not. But there are organisations such as mine that realise that if we can make good money and employ it well, why wouldn't we want to? And it certainly helps when you're trying to position a technology service, when you can say we've got a police force with us, because they tend to care about security. And that's probably a USP that we've underplayed in the past. We won't be underplaying it in the future. So I think, but again, I think it starts and finishes with my earlier answer to your question. It is about mindset, really. Commercial for some is a scary word. There are councils falling over all over the UK because they've made rubbish investment decisions. It doesn't matter what they've invested in, their due diligence has just been poor. And that's putting off others. But there is still a place, I think, for commercialisation within public service, as long as you're doing it to further your goals and not just to speculate. That, I think, is an important differential for us.
Brilliant, thank you. We're out of time now, but thank you very much to the panellists. We covered quite a broad range there, but I think sort of just to summarise, the question is, can we afford to innovate? Can we afford not to? And I think it's that we can't afford not to. We have to look at new ways to deliver services, make sure that we're meeting our user needs and our business needs. And it'd be great to have a big conversation about commercial, the word commercial across all the sectors, because if we're talking about barriers wherever I go, I do think there is an opportunity to look at ways of improving that and building and being more bold about our relationships, government's relationship with the suppliers, and really truly seeing them as our partners to help us deliver our services, as opposed to being worried about having to engage with those people that are not non-civil servants or public servants. I think it's been really great, and I do hope that we will you'll enjoy the rest of Tech Week. I think some good things raised today. If we'll stay on the stage for a bit, if anybody wants to come up and speak to us, I didn't ask the panel for permission for that, so they might just run off. But thank you very much. Here's the panel, and here's to Josie. Thank you. Oh, I think Josie's going to close out. Sorry, I was just taking Josie's role.
No, that's great, Sally. Round of applause for Sally and her panel, please. So a couple of things as we wrap this session up. As Sally said, you're free to speak to the panel after this. Also, our next session in here at the Premier stage is at 3:30, and that's about how fintechs are responding to and addressing the cost of living crisis across Wales. And important for you to know also, the Growth Clinic is now open. So if you want to go to the Growth Clinic, turn right out of here and go to the end there, and that's where you'll find things happening in the Growth Clinic. Okay, so lots for you to do, and hopefully see you back here at 3:30. Sally, again, thank you very much.